All right, everybody. So to kick us off, I just want to welcome you all to the March edition of PennTESOL's second Saturday seminar series. That's a tough one to say and not mess up. We're all really happy to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Saturday morning. I want to welcome you to have your coffee, your tea. If you're still having breakfast, I don't think our presenters would be offended if you nibble away. So please just enjoy yourselves and make yourself comfortable. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. As we have a few more people come in, I'll ask them to just do the same so you can take a look and see who else is here. If you want to adjust the name in your little Zoom square, you can go ahead and do that and write your affiliation. You don't have to. You can add your pronouns as well if you'd like to do that. As you know, we're recording. So Bill is going to have this uploaded to our PennTESOL's YouTube channel, and that does get a good amount of traffic. So you can feel free to, share the recording afterwards, share the link, send it on to folks, for whom you think it might be helpful afterwards as well. I'll drop the link to the YouTube channel in the chat, so you can check that out, and you can see all of our previous Second Saturday seminars recorded there. We are going to have another Second Saturday seminar in April on Saturday, April 13th. It's going to be a panel discussion on the pros and cons of sheltered ESL instruction, mostly in the K-12 setting. There was a recent article in Language Magazine that talked a little bit about some research suggesting that in K-12, it's not as beneficial particularly when it comes to reading skills for ELs. So hot topic, some debate. We're going to have a panel of most likely 4 people speaking about that. And our spring conference is coming up on Saturday, May 4th at Temple University. The CFP is open through March 17th. So if you'd like to submit for a breakout session, please do. And registration details will be coming soon. But now, the real reason we're here, I'm going to just quickly introduce 2 very good friends of mine and colleagues, Gretchen and Michelle, and I'll let them take it away. So Gretchen Spencer, who has her master's in TESOL from Temple, is the manager of adult and community education at CCP, the Community College of Philadelphia. And Michelle Ferguson also has her master's in TESOL, also from Temple. This isn't a promo for Temple, I promise. Is the former education program manager at Highest, Pennsylvania, and she is the incoming English learner, the L Point, which is a coordinator role at the Newcomer Learner Academy at the Franklin Learning Center, which is a Philadelphia School District high school. So Gretchen and Michelle, take it away.
Thank you, and I am going to share my screen. There we are. So we are here to talk to you today about moving into management and transitioning from teacher to educational administrator roles, which is something that a lot of teachers end up doing without a lot of background knowledge or sometimes support. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we have learned and seen in our experience.
So like Val mentioned, my name is Michelle Ferguson. It's great to be with you all today. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the incoming L Point at Franklin Learning Center and was previously the education program manager at Highest, Pennsylvania.
And I am Gretchen Spencer with she, her pronouns. I am the current manager of adult and community education at Community College of Philadelphia. I'm also an ESL instructor, currently just substituting. And I'm the former director of adult education for a local nonprofit, which was my first foray into management.
So we want to take a quick couple of minutes to hear from all of you and to kind of just get us warmed up here. So feel free to answer any of these questions, but I want to pose these to the group. For those of you who are either in admin or maybe you're not in admin and you're here just to learn about it, maybe you're curious, what has been the best and the hardest part of admin for you? Or what would you think is the best? What would you think is the hardest? And then what are some qualities in a supervisor that you've appreciated in a supervisor that you know or that you've had personally? So feel free to use the chat or come off mute, whatever you want.
I'd be glad to start.
Sure.
So I'll say, what are some qualities in a supervisor that I have appreciated? That is autonomy. I've had several supervisors some of whom were more micromanagey, and some of whom gave me total autonomy in the classroom. And I appreciated the autonomy because, I am a qualified teacher and I like to do the things that I like to do in my classes.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing, Bill.
I'd like to answer what the best part of admin is, and for me that to see the bigger picture. Oh, let me put my video on so you can see me talking. So when I do administrative roles, I get to see the bigger picture and see how my courses connect with others. And the hardest part for me has been dealing with the problems that people bring to me. I don't mind cleaning up my own mess, but I don't like cleaning up other people's messes.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Barb. I think sometimes moving into a management role is sort of the next step for a lot of folks. But really thinking through like what are the pros and cons of this role and what are the differences. It's a ton of work with other people, often who have very different work styles from you, and you do get called into all of the positives, like you're saying, you can see everything across the board. We also usually get all of the bad news, and it's usually up to you to fix, which is tough. And I'm seeing in the chat additional qualities in a supervisor from Eric, supportive and knowledgeable about the program, adaptable to workflows, and a shout out to Gretchen. Thanks. So like I said, we're going to keep this really quick, but we did just want to get our discussion started here, because I think it's important to share that we all have things that we really value about being in admin roles and things that are challenging, for all of us. And those might be similar, they might be different. And similarly, I think we can all get stuck in our own admin approach. But I think when we zoom out, it's really helpful to think about other supervisors that have been helpful to us. And so we wanted to add that question.
Thank you so much for cooperating with that. And thank you, Eric. I'm glad. All right, so we're going to go through basically some questions that we had that we can hopefully help and answer for new admins going in. I'm going to move this because I can't actually see the question over my little share screen here. There we go. So what strategies carry over from teaching into administration, and what resources are available to new administrators?
Thanks, Gretchen. So I actually wrote an article for PTE Voices about this question, the strategies question. And so I've linked that here, and we can maybe throw that in the chat or, get that to all of you. But thanks. But I wrote about actually applying teacher strategies to supervision and administration, because there are so many things that really do carry over. So what I found to be successful was asking questions and guiding your folks towards an answer or an approach that might work, rather than telling them. I think it helps people feel more empowered, and it also connects to my third point, which is that as the teacher and the supervisor, you don't necessarily know more than your team or than your students, right? You have a certain role, and it's important to acknowledge what that role means and why you're in that role, so that you yourself feel empowered. But it's not to say that other folks don't have great ideas too. So asking questions rather than being micromanagey, as Bill alluded to, or really direct, can often be a great tool in working together. I've also found that transparency is key. So we'll talk about it later on a little bit more, but when making decisions, inviting folks to be part of that decision, or also just sharing where your thought process is and why you're leaning a certain way on something, or why changes are happening, is incredibly valuable. Something else that I would recommend is bringing that same trauma awareness or trauma-informed approach into your conversations with your staff and other team members and other folks that you collaborate with. So I think we often think of being trauma-informed with our students, because for me, working in a refugee resettlement agency, there were certain experiences that students might bring to conversations to be aware of. And I found that it was really crucial to assume that staff might have also had traumatic experiences or might just benefit from some of those same strategies. So considering the language that we use, considering our, general approach to conversations and affect, always signaling when you're going to turn off the lights, maybe for a staff presentation or something, I think it goes a long way with your team as well. Moving to the resources question, honestly, ask for resources. See what's out there for you, advocate for yourself for some PD. It really goes a long way. But the thing that I would, I guess, caution about is that it's also okay to do things your way. So take time if this is your first admin role, really get settled into the role before feeling like, you need to make certain changes or you need to figure out, quote unquote, the best way to do something. Give yourself a couple of months, see how things unfold, and then you can start to really ask for additional resources about being the best manager or administrator that you can be.
All right, and to basically echo a lot of what Michelle was saying, we pretty much had similar answers across the board. But communication for me is really important. And teachers are excellent communicators, but especially strategies for working with ELLs and speakers of other languages. I found that a lot of folks who are in administrative roles who have not been teachers before might not have the same experience, the same knowledge of how to communicate with those populations. So you can kind of share your experience and become the go-to person to really help facilitate that communication with students, clients, whoever you're working with. Also, of course, knowledge of andragogy or pedagogy, if you are working in the K-12 system, really helps because in management roles, you're often expected to work with curriculum, to choose new textbooks, to decide how students are going to be assessed and moved from one level to the next. So that knowledge just of the best practices for education is really useful to keep in mind and to inform the decisions that you're making. And of course, assessment is really important because strategies to assess what students are learning is actually not super different from strategies that are assessing program success. You still need those formative and summative assessments, things that happen partway through your program year, things that happen in the end, qualitative versus quantitative data. So you're still looking at all of those ideas just in a much larger way, because you're, instead of looking at one student or one class, you're looking at all of it. And as for resources, my answer was basically the same as Michelle's. So I'll just echo that. Ask. A lot of the time, the company that you're working with will have resources in place already. So see what's already available to you, but also don't be afraid to make changes to that and do what works for you.
So moving right along, what are some strategies to prioritize and stay organized? Something that I found really helpful was actually getting a teacher planner, like a paper planner that I believe are designed with K-12 teachers in mind. If you're teaching, 6 or 7 classes a day, and there are 6 or 7 columns for each week. And I found this really helpful because, like Barb mentioned, there are so many simultaneous projects and different things that you're brought into at all times. So rather than having, first period, second period, whatever, I organized it by theme of my job. And so I had like a K-8 section, I had an adult section, then I had different admin responsibilities. So I had a column specifically for any grant reporting or tracking that I needed to do. And that really helped me stay organized sort of thematically, what I needed to do or follow up with certain supervisees about. Something else that was really a game changer for me was advice that I got from another manager. It is our job, just as much as anything else, to stay flexible with our time so that we can be responsive to issues that come up or to be responsive to time sensitive questions or a teammate who is suddenly sick and needs a sub, right? as the manager, that is just as much our responsibility as is, you know, being in meetings all day. I think it can feel like these meetings that you might be invited to are super crucial. You shouldn't miss them. But really, it is very important to make sure that you have flexibility every single day, or most days, as much as you can manage, in order to catch up and really just be available for your team when things inevitably need a second set of eyes or somebody needs to talk something out.
So for me, I like to take time at the beginning on a Monday or at the end of a week on a Friday before I leave to just list out every task that I know is coming up. Everything that I can think of in one spot on one page. Then I go back and I prioritize those tasks. So I'll put like little exclamation points next to them based on things that absolutely have to get done in a day, things that need to be done by the end of the week, things that are coming up but are really important and I need to get started on, things that maybe can wait for a little while. So I have that list, I update it at the beginning of each week. And I also really enjoy the dopamine rush of crossing off tasks, both on that list. And I like the task app on Outlook, where I can also list those tasks kind of as I think of things that come up. And that list also helps me add notes on the task app without like crossing them off yet if I've gotten part of it done, but not the whole thing, or to make little due dates that'll pop up for me and remind me when things are coming up. I also have 3 different calendars. One on my wall that's just a regular calendar with the really important events listed, like if we have a test or an information session and what time those are. One on my computer that has absolutely everything on it, meetings, all of that. And then one that sits on my wall and is about 9 months that I can see of a program schedule. So you can see the example of my program schedule for the next 3 months. That just gives me an outline of when things are happening program-wise, like we're on spring break right now at the very end. So that black box is me letting myself know there's nothing happening that week. I also wanted to mention that it's really important to beware of burnout. Managers are expected to do a lot, and I am very bad at saying no. So that's something that I have struggled to learn, is that it is okay to say no sometimes, because you don't want to get so overwhelmed that it is impossible to keep up with everything. And you don't want to sacrifice your mental health. It's kind of that idea of putting your oxygen mask on before you put it on anyone else. So just, you know, be careful, be gentle with yourself as well. So our next question, what are some strategies for improving attendance and retention?
So there are different times throughout the year at which you can take a pulse of the students in your classroom, and that really helps with both attendance and retention. So really, first step would be to survey your students, their parents, potentially, you know, case managers or the teachers on your team, of course, with different versions of a survey, any volunteers that you might have in the program, in order to identify, you know, what students would like from this program and what has been beneficial in the past if they're returning students. This can help you determine the factors that students are facing, and you can get really, really granular about this. So you can ask students, I've asked students in the past, like, you know, what about these specific aspects of the curriculum? What do you like? What do you feel like there's too much of? What about the types of activities? What about, you know, the time of the program, the day of the program? You can get very, very specific if you are struggling with attendance in order to really try to determine what is going on behind the scenes. In that, you can ask students, again, parents, whomever you're surveying, about other factors that might be barriers to attendance. So, for example, we see with our high school students, for example, we see that there are a ton of things going on that they are juggling. So they have a lot of competing priorities, especially juniors and seniors, And so trying to maybe have the program during the school day, during like an advisory period, was something that we were able to make a switch to when seeing that students simply just don't have time after school between work and other responsibilities. We also see that childcare is a really big barrier for a lot of adult students. And so in a past program, we were able to offer free childcare through the use of childcare volunteers. That might not be possible for you, and certainly something to really consider before offering, but there are certain ways to eliminate some of these barriers. Transportation is another one, so maybe that means providing SEPTA passes for all students, or providing a quick SEPTA orientation, or considering the location of the program. If one semester to another, you're finding different students in different neighborhoods that need a closer program. Finally, I'm personally not above giving incentives. They work, especially related to the topic. So if you have program supplies money that you're able to give directly to students, or buy supplies that might be a little bit jazzier, something that we've done in the past is planners for our college prep program, headphones, particularly. I found incentives to be a great tool if inviting guest speakers, where I want to make sure that those guest speakers feel like their time is being valued, and that, we're not just going to have one student of 40 on the Saturday career fair, for example. So during COVID, we were able to provide headphones, pretty nice wireless headphones, to any student that attended our career fair, so that then after that, they could do a virtual internship, or, have some professional opportunities from home during COVID, where they're living with their families and it might be kind of a hectic space. So trying to find a way to relate the incentive to the topic at hand.
So I did an entire presentation about this for COABE and PACE last year with one of my colleagues. I cannot link that in the chat right now, because if I do, my screen share will go away. So I will do that later. But I will link to all of those resources that we have. So a really quick version of what we talked about there is we talked about the importance of tracking and analyzing your data. There is a lot that exists. If you're lucky, you'll have access to past data as well. So you can include attendance, assessments, like the needs assessment surveys that Michelle was talking about. Whatever you can get your hands on, keep track of it and make sure to analyze it as well. It's not particularly useful if it just sits there and you don't do anything with it. Orientation is really, really important. Research has showed, and as well as my own personal experience, that orientations vastly improve student retention, that students who attend are much more likely to stay throughout the semester. So in an orientation, you want to include the expectations both of and for students, so their rights and responsibilities, how they can expect to proceed, what's the process, especially for students in my program who might be looking to go from my non-credit ESL programs to credit ESL to getting a degree, and how long is that going to take, so they can sort of manage what those expectations are. You can also include resources so that later down the line, if a student runs into a problem like childcare or their car breaks down, what do? They don't just drop the program. They already know who they can come and talk to. We also include translated materials, which, depending on your program and your budget, can be difficult to come by, because Google Translate, of course, is decent, but not great. So I would highly recommend doing that with a professional company if you're able to. One thing that we recently were able to translate was a bunch of email templates, because a lot of what we send out is exactly the same every year, only the dates or the times are going to change. So we got them translated with little blank spaces for the dates, and that has just vastly improved the number of students who were able to follow the instructions the first time in order to get signed up without us chasing them down for extra information or something like that. And I also have there a little chart that you can see some of our data analysis on from one of the needs assessments that we completed, where we were sort of surprised, but perhaps should not have been, to see that post-pandemic, a lot of students had internet and computers at home, because a lot of them had students in the school district and had received laptops and hotspots through that. But then what they really needed was better access to childcare. So it's sort of good to take a look at that from semester to semester or whatever you're working with, because it does change in between.
So another question that we had was, what are some strategies for managing data for reporting purposes and for program evaluation and improvement? And so something that was very helpful to me was a running document to keep track of any updates that would eventually needed to be reported. So for a specific grant, I had a semi-annual report due, so kind of like a midterm and a final, where twice a year I would need to report on a variety of different aspects about our programs. And of course, I can't take credit for this system. My predecessor set this up for me, but brilliant. And so in the document, I would keep every detail about every program that we were running that was supported by this major grant, by the different elements that would need to be included in the report. And so it was really important to stay consistent with that. I had it on my calendar to update every 2 weeks. During busy times, that honestly felt like pretty far apart to wait 2 weeks, but during more slow times, that felt really appropriate. Consistency is really key with something like that, because if you do miss it once or twice, then it's harder to remember exactly what happened. But then during grant reporting time, all of the information was right there, and I had already coded, each section of the program to each section of the grant, and so really could just pick out the most important highlights to include. Something else that I wanted to mention is that grant metrics don't always align with our own program goals. So they want to probably and try to, but it's also important to have our own program evaluation metrics so that we know if we are serving the students in the right ways, if we are meeting our own goals. And so something that you can try to do is talk to your team and brainstorm with them about ways to ensure that you are keeping data for grant reporting purposes, but that it's also meshing with any sort of program goals that you have. So for example, more recently, my team and I received a metric from a grant that we were supposed to be tracking that didn't necessarily jive with the program that we were actually running. And so we took a couple of weeks to really think about, how do we want to incorporate this, because we have to, in a way that really feels meaningful for our own program goals. So we ended up doing a little bit more work, because then we added a second layer to it that was then useful for our actual program purpose, but it felt so much more relevant and meaningful because just doing it the way the grant would have asked us to do it felt completely irrelevant, to be honest. And so really making things work for you and not letting that internal program evaluation go by the wayside.
So again, I'm sort of echoing a lot of what Michelle already said, but learning those requirements and processes that already exist for reporting as soon as you can when you step into a new role is really important. That way you know from the very beginning which things you need to really pay attention to and which things you need to prepare before the time comes that they're all due. Making sure that your spreadsheets, your documents, whatever you're using to track things are really easy to access for anyone who needs them. That's another way to sort of delegate some of what needs to get done, is that if I know that my admin assistant needs to be able to find out which students are registered already, she has access to the same document I do. She can answer those questions. I don't need to go back and do it. And that's the same for reporting purposes. If you have multiple people who are looking at those same documents, you have the same information, you make sure you're on the same page. As Michelle said, updating them throughout the year, making sure that you have those things while they're still fresh in your memory, so you don't have to like try and think back at the end of the year, what was that thing that we did? How many of them? And then by the time you reach your reporting due dates, they are already done, or at least halfway done. Then using internal and external resources that you have. I am very lucky with Community College of Philadelphia to have access to a ton of internal reporting tools that we have. But there's also a lot of external resources that I have made use of, such as working with the Office of Children and Families with City and the City Span network, going to different PDs like this to learn what exists and what I can borrow and steal, because I think that's a huge part of the education community is not reinventing the wheel. We sort of encourage each other to make use of what we've already created. So that link that I could not share earlier, but will, with all of the information about what we've used for retention. That includes a lot of reporting metrics as well. So I fully encourage you to take them, use them. That's what we created that folder for. So we've talked a lot about sort of the data and more admin aspect. So we also need, as managers, to work with social aspects. So how do you cultivate a community on your team, especially when we're working with part-time instructors and staff?
So something that I like to do was to encourage cross-team collaboration instead of me personally as the manager always being the number two or the assist on projects. So knowing your team's strengths and being able to say, you know, hey, for this adult education project, actually our high school person would be a really great resource for this because of the, you know, the inherent collaboration. Also, her brain works in a certain way, you know, whatever it is. Encouraging those things, being mindful of folks' capacity, of course, but encouraging those things sometimes rather than you being the person to help out with every project, it gets another set of eyes, it gets another voice in things, and it does establish really nice social networks between some of the teams, especially those that might not always work together on things. It's a really, really nice option. Including social opportunities. So those might be a weekly team meeting, they might be you know, work happy hours, whether virtual or in person. Something that can be really fun is trying out games or activities that you're going to do in class together. So if you have a standing meeting, it can be a really nice time for an instructor to say, hey, I'm going to try this new thing in class next week. Can we try it out? See how it goes. So fun, you know? Additionally, at nonprofits in particular, there are a lot of organization-wide events, sometimes required for staff, sometimes optional for staff. And so as the manager, you really set the tone for attendance. Of course, we don't want to force people to go to things that they don't need to or don't want to go to, but trying to have a positive attitude about something and saying that you'll be there, other members of the team will be there, and creating like a little team moment at some of those larger things. So for example, at a staff picnic, my team and I all sat together and had a really lovely time and played some of the organization-wide games on our team. And it was really fun, trying to encourage things like that.
So for me, it is really difficult to do this, and I want to work more on it. Because my staff is scattered, not just over different times, but also over multiple campuses and locations. Since we have different regional centers, we have the main campus, we have people who are only online. It can be hard to get people all together in the same place at the same time. So we include joint professional development, paid, which really encourages people to come. So that everyone has a chance to learn together and to participate together and to share their own experiences, their own expertise about those topics, including through different programs. And especially going back to in person, reminding everyone we all have legs, instead of doing everything on Zoom as much as possible, because Zoom does still make things accessible. So I think it is important to keep that in mind. But it is nice to see people in person. And inviting people to internal and external events as well. So I share out emails with my instructors all the time. Hey, this event is coming up. Join the community, the broader adult education community. Invite folks to PTE, whenever possible, just keeping them involved with the broader community as well.
All right. So how do you create teaching positions with dignity and advocate for this within your org or institution? So important. So one thing that I do want to offer in terms of a disclaimer is that in my role, honestly, a lot of the decisions, particularly for part-time staff, were things that I could make either myself or with my team, and had a lot of autonomy over creating positions, which Gretchen can talk a little bit more about on the other side of things, but I certainly know that that's not always the case. And there are obviously pros and cons to that as well. So first of all, I think bringing your staff into decisions that affect them as much as possible really can't be overstated. So whether that is, adding more hours or adding a task or changing the position in some way, certainly we want to make sure that the staff have a say in those decisions, whether it's appropriate to bring them into larger meetings or if this needs to be sort of a check-in ahead of time before your meeting with any higher ups. Really having their perspective is super valuable and provides more information for you in conversations with your higher ups. Also, not just their own experience and what they might want in the position, although that's super valuable, but also what they think of the position itself. They might not be in that position forever. They might be looking to move within the organization. And so still leveraging their experience in that role and trying to understand what makes sense for that role. Something that I tried to do was to prioritize finances for staff to create fuller positions. So maybe adding certain tasks or responsibilities in order to bulk the hours for a position would make it easier to fill and would provide that dignity for a position. So if there's something that you need done at 5 hours a week, that might work for some, but that might be really difficult for folks who are trying to juggle multiple roles. 5 hours a week is not super substantial. So if you're able to combine that with another project that needs a person, adding more time so that it feels like a little bit more of a robust role for somebody makes it more attractive and more sustainable for that person. It really shows that you care about their sustainability as a human being. Paying for planning if you can, and if you can't, certainly, most people can't, and it's totally okay. It makes sense. But then trying to advocate for a higher hourly rate if you're not able to pay for any planning. Adding in even just a couple of extra hours for planning if you're not able to pay for all of the planning that you think makes sense for the role, but even if just a couple of flex hours, or again, a little bit more of a higher rate if you're not able to pay for planning. Finally, removing admin burdens from part-time staff where possible. So for some of my instructors, they expressed to me that some of the admin responsibilities that they had as instructors was taking a little bit more time than they had anticipated, as was lesson planning, teaching, some of the other things that they were really excited about in their role. There was honestly just too much going on. And so then as the manager, recognizing that it is your job to hold the admin stuff when your part-time folks can't do it. So whether you're the direct supervisor or if there's another direct supervisor for that person, seeing where you can plug in order to eliminate some of those pieces of the job that just aren't as exciting and might really have a lasting impact on folks' motivation.
So on the other side of things, you might be in a position where there isn't quite as much flexibility. So you want to consider your circle of influence, what you can change, what you can advocate for, and what you can't. So for instance, I in my current position, we have a union for the instructors, which is wonderful, but it means that I cannot change anything about the pay rate. I can't add planning hours. I can't change the level. Any questions about it, I have to tell people to go talk to the union or talk to HR. So there's less flexibility there, but there are other ways that I can do things, like paying teachers to help me with those administrative tasks, like grading tests, or trying to max out the number of hours that I can give them. Whatever it is within my ability to do to make those changes, to make the positions the best they can be. Just listening is hugely important. So you might not be able to make changes for whatever the reason is, but you can discuss alternatives. So maybe I can't change your hours, but what would make it better? Is there, an admin task that you're doing that it would help if I could change or take that on? What else could we do? And just keeping a list of it, letting teachers know or staff know that you are paying attention and acknowledging whatever the issue is. Or sometimes it's not a problem, it's a success, and celebrating those successes with them as well. Acknowledging your internal bias when you are making a decision. Who benefits or who doesn't benefit from what you're doing? Have you gotten input from everyone who's going to be affected? And really think about like the broader implications of that. Who is going to be affected? Because it's not always just the people it directly affects, but the ones who it indirectly affects. So just thinking that through. And one thing that I particularly hated and struggled with in the beginning, but therefore have sought out help to get better at, is conflict management. So again, I will put that link in the chat once I can, but I kind of came up with just a really short list of the key things I have learned over the couple of years that I've been doing this about conflict management, because that was the hardest part for me, and I really wanted to seek out resources to deal with that. So just things that I have learned to make me much more, it's never really comfortable to do, but much more capable, able to handle it, and ready and prepared for those moments where things get difficult. All right, so we actually did it. We made it.
I was just about to send my little like 3-minute warning, but you guys, wow, this was wonderful. And I thought the pace was excellent. So yeah, so let's move into Q&A. We have a great little group here, and I know that Michelle and Gretchen would love to hear your comments, questions, engage in some dialogue with you. So yeah, does anybody want to share a question, comment? You can unmute and go for it.
Can I just tell you that as you were talking, I was writing down some ideas, and a really easy one, I think, is to, I'm going to send thank you notes to the part-time people who work in my department, and try to have something personal on each one. So it's not just a generic thank you about maybe something specific I know about them or something specific they did, because I know I appreciate when I get that thank you note, and it will take the cost of a stamp to do that. So that's on my list for, we're on spring break starting Monday, so I can get a whole week to think about it, and then it'll be first on my list Monday morning. So thank you for that.
That's such a great idea. I do think it goes a really long way, and you can be intentional about, not doing it all at once, depending on what your program schedule is. So if you have a certain program that's wrapping up, sending thank you notes to those folks, of course, so that you're kind of staggering it. I used to write my thank you notes while watching TV also. So maybe not great with boundaries, but if you can't find the time to like handwrite them during your workday, you can kind of do that offline too.
Yeah, I love that.
Thanks for sharing that, Barb. Yeah, it's great. And I like the point that you made just about making it personal, something that you've you know that they do, you want to, call out and kind of in a really positive way and just recognize, yeah, it's great.
I guess as a follow-up to that, like how consistently or what would be the circumstances under which those notes would be given?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think a program wrapping is a nice time to do that. So, at the conclusion of a semester or a school year, or if you have a summer program, something like that, I think those can be a nice time. Certainly, we can think about Thanksgiving, the holidays, Educator Appreciation Week, which I believe there's week or day in May. It always kind of sneaks up, but there's something there. Really whenever, depending on how close you are with your team. You could also, I had everybody's birthdays on my calendar, just to, know when their birthdays are coming up. I don't think you need to, send thank you notes like all the time, but certainly once or twice a year is.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Bill is asking, Gretchen, may I include these links that you're putting in the chat in the PTE Voices review? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And the Google Drive link. Okay,
Yep.
Great. Yeah, thanks. What else? What else? Anybody else want to share or ask a question?
I was curious to learn more about the tracking, the reporting tracking document that you have. Can you go into a little bit more detail about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really just a Google Doc, nothing fancy. So at the top, there is a key. So whatever each component is titled within the report, and then what it sort of actually means in plain English. So anything related to staffing, anything related to new programmatic updates or initiatives, services, and this is all coming from the grant. So like Gretchen said, of course, the first thing is to know what you'll need to report on. Any documentation or grant reports that were submitted, any financial updates, things like that. So then I would create a chart by month. So for example, March 2024, here's each of those categories again, and then literally just a bullet pointed list worked for me. Any updates? So if we had a new, if we had a field trip, I would indicate which program it was, where it was, how many students came, again, really just whatever you'll need to know for the grant report. And then including any successes and wins, I think is always really nice, because then you can highlight those in the grant report as well. So related to, anything. There might be some PD that you gave or events that you attended that doesn't really fit into a specific category, but highlights the work that your staff is doing, or highlights any student wins, scholarships, moving into the next level, a win in class, anything like that.
And how often do you update it?
So I had it on my calendar bi-weekly. There were definitely times that it was not happening every 2 weeks. There were times where it was once a month. And then I'd be kind of kicking myself thinking, okay, what happened in February? Especially, managers are super busy. And so from one day to the next, it's hard to remember what's going on, let alone a whole month. So weekly could make sense depending on how much time you have, or how much is going on. Every 2 weeks could also work. Kind of depends what works for you. But the consistency is really the most important part.
I also, this is such a great thing to talk about, because yeah, it's just so hard to remember and capture everything at the end. You want to be like, yeah, the program's great. And of course, like the things that you struggle with really stick out. Another thing I will say to kind of connect this to Gretchen's points about calendars, I think that's also makes the case for a really, really good calendar system, because then at least if you are only doing it monthly or even bi-weekly, you can look back at your calendar and be like, what are the things we did? Oh yeah, we did that thing. Oh yeah. Oh, I had that conversation. Oh, that happened. Like that, I think is really a nice support when you have a good calendar that doesn't, drive you bonkers, but that is really well coded. You understand it well. And it could look, if your system, it's your brain. So Gretchen, the fact that you had 3 at first, I was like, whoa, but then you explained how they're different and how they function really differently. And it makes sense. it makes sense. So I think just wanted to add that falling back on the calendar to support you with the grant reporting, document tracking, and the reporting is helpful.
I was just thinking that's exactly what I do is I'll go back into a calendar, I'll go back into, like, I make those task lists once a week. So I can go back and the task lists are another like track of what has gotten done over the past several weeks. So that I can just go back to those and see what happened.
And the other thing I'll say is to look at your notes, sorry, Charlie, but to look at your notes with your team. So any supervision documents, and going back to Barb's thank you note idea, like being involved, right? You have to visit programs even when you don't have to. It's important to be at programs, to see these student wins, to see the teachers interacting with students, to really know your team, certainly not just to be able to talk about it in reports, but also for the human aspect of it. And for the reporting and the thank you notes, right? So it's really important to have a thorough picture of what's going on. So in a team meeting, if folks are sharing wins from the program, that's a great time to pull up your tracking document and say, okay, this week at this program, this student had this amazing win. I didn't see it myself, but you know, my team saw it, and things like that, keeping track there.
That's awesome. Thank you both. Gretchen, I just wanted to ask how did you color code your calendars? Were they color coded by like each one differently, or can you make changes within a calendar?
So the only color-coded calendar is the program one. The others are not color-coded. That one I actually have to thank Anne for at Providence Center because I took that and brought it over with me to CCP. So that's color-coded just by when our classes, when our days off, when is testing. That's the only 3 colors I have on it. That way it's pretty simple, so it doesn't get like rainbow colors. So it's really just there so I can like look across and say, okay, that is when classes start, that is when classes stop, and therefore I have to count 3 weeks back to say that's when testing is gonna be next. So it just keeps me on track for the program year.
Thanks for sharing these details, guys. They're super helpful. What else? Anything else that folks want to bring up before we wrap?
I have a question. What has been maybe the most helpful professional development that you like regularly engage in for being an administrator?
So again, I am lucky to have the support of my supervisors. CCP has a leadership program that I was able to apply for and participate in this year, which has been really helpful just generally most in networking and also learning a lot about the background of higher education, because this is my first foray into higher education, even though I had worked in management before. And that has been really helpful both in hearing from my peers and hearing from people who have been in these roles for a really long time to talk about different aspects of it, from DEI to budget management to all these like really different little aspects, and deep diving into them once a month or so. So I think making peer connections is honestly one of the best parts of it. That is a really specific program, but looking for, leadership development, if you can search specifically for that kind of program.
And no, go ahead. No, you go first, Michelle. Go ahead.
I would say too, if you are doing things without maybe the support of a larger institution like CCP, at a nonprofit, you can organize a lot of conversations yourself. So in my role, there were other managers at my same level, and we were able to share challenges together, and collect resources that we were getting from webinars, from other things. I did a webinar that I can link here in the chat, kind of expensive, but if you have any PD money or can advocate at your institution for it, there's one that's a general one. It's called Managing to Change the World. It's a really popular 2 or 4 day webinar from the Management Center. And I'd had actually a supervisee who had done it at a previous organization as well. Great. There's actually a specific one for educators, which I did not know at the time, so I haven't done that one. I can't speak to it. But they really give you a crash course on like giving feedback, you know, all of the different elements of being a manager, and you practice as well. So you, you know, bring a situation that you're experiencing on your team, and then you know, go into breakout rooms. It's on Zoom. You go into breakout rooms and you share and you practice. So really a crash course in management. I'd recommend getting your feet wet for a couple of months at least before, you know, jumping into it, so that you have some experience and have questions that you want answered, and can get a little bit more out of it. Charlie?
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, if I may shamelessly plug some initiatives that the city does. I'm in fact PD and training manager for the adult education team. So we host tons of free webinars and in-person workshops throughout the year. We have a conference coming up in May. We have a couple of other programs that you might find useful for yourself and for your team. So Sarah, are you on Basecamp by any chance? Do you know what Basecamp is?
I do not.
Okay, well, we're going to get you onto Basecamp, and we post all of our opportunities there. But we have some great workshops coming up starting at the end of the month, virtual webinars, and so we'll get you connected. And anyone else who's interested, I'm happy to connect you on Basecamp and add you to our newsletter, so that way you can stay informed of PD opportunities through the city. They're all free.
Charlie, would you mind putting your email in the chat?
Yes, thank you.
Don't mind. I was going to write it for you, but then I thought I'd ask.
That's okay. If you don't mind, Bill, I'm on my iPad and I'm holding it with 2 hands, so I have to like. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at my nostrils the whole time. So.
Charlie, I will be asking you about that May conference.
Oh yeah, great, Michael. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing that I'll add too is kind of like I mentioned before, you have resources on your team as well. So on my team, I mentioned that I'd had supervisees who had been managers before. And so you shouldn't feel afraid or uncomfortable or awkward to honestly ask and be transparent and say, hey, I'm struggling with this one area. Like, can I get your thoughts on this? What do you think? Because people might have a fresher perspective coming into something once, you know, if it's a little bit out of their usual realm, and they also have really good insights usually.
100%. Yeah. I have absolutely gone to supervisors and said, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this, help. And again, have been very lucky to have very supportive supervisors and mentors in all of the roles I've been in. Especially, like I said, with that conflict management, that's something I sought out because I was so uncomfortable with it that I was like, all right, I need to learn about this. I need to figure out how to deal with this because I can't avoid it. So I asked around and found some like online resources as well. And it really helped me a lot.
And I will say too, you know, so we're talking about this trend in education that, you know, you're maybe a really strong instructor, maybe you've been somewhere a long time, a short period of time, and an opportunity comes up for you to move into a coordinator role, or maybe even just supervising student teachers or volunteers. Like, it doesn't even have to be paid staff. It happens a lot and it can happen really fast. So another thing I just want to piggyback on, you guys made me think of, is like, by bringing in other peers, like even asking your team, or, you know, for me, one thing that I remember doing, and this was with Charlie and Michelle, they were supervising interns and contract staff. And I would actually organize like supervision conversations. We did it like once a month or every other month, and would just pull together like a topic and resources. And I would do it for myself because I wasn't making the time for myself, for my own professional development, but then also for them, knowing that like they had just moved into that role or they were going to be moving into that role. You never know when the other people in your organization, teachers you're working with, are going to be bumped into that spot too. So you're supporting them, you're supporting yourself by just, I think to Michelle's point, just organizing some conversations, low effort, not, and just admitting like, hey, we're learning together kind of thing. So just, yeah, I think that's just it's just so common in education, nonprofit, higher ed, and we're not, most of us aren't trained managers. Most of us haven't, had any academic background in that. So, or formal training. So yeah. Any final questions or comments? All right. Well, this was wonderful. I think we can all offer a very rousing round of applause. Yes, this is great. Thank you both so much for your time and offering your expertise. There's a lot to unpack here. So we'll be posting the recording. Bill's going to be writing a review for our next issue of PTE Voices. Michelle is also the editor of PTE Voices, the co-editor. So shout out to Michelle for her work with that. So that's coming up. But let's continue this conversation. This is really, really important. So thank you both. Bill, I'll pass it over to you if you have anything else.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Val said. Thank you so much to everyone for coming, and we hope to see you next month for our discussion about sheltered instruction for ELLs, and also at our conference on May 4th. The call for proposals is open, so please be sure to submit any ideas that you have for presentations. And also, we have rolling acceptance for PTE Voices, or not rolling acceptance, but rather rolling acceptance of articles. Or I'm not saying this very well. We are always accepting articles for PTE Voices for Michelle's review. Woo, I got it out eventually, I think. So have a great Saturday, and we appreciate that you attend our programming.
Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.